So I don't know how many of you, like me, have a list of to-dos on your fridge or on somewhere on your desk or something like that. My list of to-dos tends to get longer rather than shorter. And it probably has something to do with me not doing some of the things on the list. There's certain things I don't mind doing. Certain things that are easier. Certain things that are harder. Caulking. Who's with me? Caulking is like the worst job. It is sticky. It never ends up looking as good as you hope it would. I don't know, we watch like HGTV sometimes and just, the guy walks along, done. And I'm like, there's no way. Like, this is AI. It doesn't, people know how to do it. I don't know how to do it, and it's worse. There's other chores I don't mind doing. I'm a little easier. Like, oddly enough, like fixing a garage door, I'd rather do that than caulking. Like, it doesn't work, but I did the job. Now we're having this trouble right now where like we hit the button and it goes and then freezes, and like you have to go and like manually lift it. Maybe I'm just not very good at fixing things, but some jobs are easier, some jobs are harder. The job I find easiest of all is watching Netflix. Like, unfortunately, it's not on my to-do list. It's just one of those things. Is there anybody else like that? Like maybe you have a list, like things that are left undone, like laundry's left undone. There's dishes in the sink. You end up doing something that isn't on your list at all. I think sometimes it's a matter of like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's not just true in chores, but it's also true in your life. You get takeout, or you eat a bag of chips because it's easier than cooking. You stay in the same job because it's too daunting to think of a change. We tend to drift towards what's easiest, loudest, and self-serving. At least I find that in my life. I imagine it's true for a lot of us. You drift towards what's easiest. You drift towards what's loudest. What the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If there's something that is demanding your attention, it's hard to ignore it. And most often we drift towards what's self-serving. I think we do this because of convenience. We do it because of distraction. Sometimes we do it because of deception or misidentification. Some things pop up that we think is more important than other things. I think most often we do this because of selfishness. Like there are certain things that we should be doing, but because of our own desires, because of our own issues, whatever, we end up doing something that we maybe even, I wouldn't say shouldn't be doing, but just shouldn't be doing as much as the thing we're supposed to be doing. What I'm learning is that wise people will spend their time, energy, and money on what matters most. And this is also true when it comes to spiritual matters. See, we have a tendency to drift in our worship. Where you spend your time, where you spend your energy, where you spend your money is ultimately what we worship. And I think, I don't want to ask you to raise your hands, but I wonder how many of us, if you were to look at your bank statement, would realize that what you worship most of all is yourself. Wise people save their worship for the one true King. Wise people save their worship for the one true King. We are week 3 in an Advent series called "What Are We Waiting For?" And the last couple of weeks, I've asked the audience, what is it you're hoping for? What are you looking for? And we've had a lot of different answers with the parents and with the kids last week. Ultimately, because we're in Advent, we're waiting for the Messiah. Like, that's the whole idea of Advent, is even though He's already come, we put ourselves in the mindset of those who lived before He came, and we said, we are looking forward to the coming of our Savior. And I think I said week 1, we don't know the exact date, but we've chosen December 25th, and that's the day we celebrate His birth. And so as we approach Advent every year, as we approach that date, we enter into this mentality and say, you know what? All the busyness that goes on in life needs to take a backseat to the idea that we are going to get ready to celebrate His birth, and that He came the first time. Ultimately, as Christians, we're all waiting for His second coming as well, but Advent is about His first coming. And so the first week we talked about having the faith to say yes to God. And last week it was the kids' service, so it was a much shorter message, but we talked about putting our hope in God, that God is big enough to bring hope to the entire world, but He's also close enough to worry about your own concerns, bring hope to you individually. And this week I want to talk about worship. And if you've been in church long enough, you might have heard that the word worship comes from an Old English word, worthship. Doesn't roll off the tongue as well. But the idea is that you are you're ascribing worth to something. You are putting value on something. When you worship something, you are saying that this thing is worthy of my time, my energy, my finances, whatever language you want to use. When you worship something, you are saying that it is worthy. What do you value? So this week we're going to look at a passage from Matthew chapter 2. So if you have a Bible, turn to it. If you have a phone, open it up. If you don't, there should be one in the seat in front of you somewhere. Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1. So Matthew's already, had his chapter 1, or at least he wrote it, and we've broken it up into chapters. But we heard some of the story of Mary finding out that she was going to have a child. Joseph finding out that the child would be from God, and then really nothing. We get to Matthew, and he says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King reign of King Herod. And that's it. I mean, we know from reading Luke that there's a lot of really interesting stuff that happened. The shepherds came, all kinds of things that are happening during that whole thing, like Jesus born in a manger. Matthew doesn't cover any of that. And part of that is because of the reason that they wrote. So Luke wanted to write to say that God sent his son to be the Messiah for everyone. And so it makes, kind of makes sense that he would talk about some lowly characters like the shepherds coming and finding out and saying, well, Jesus is for me as well. But Matthew wrote to talk about Jesus as like the king, that he's the Messiah, that he is the king of the world. And so it kind of makes sense that he would talk about immediately when he's born during the reign of King Herod. And we're going to talk about some other characters that we've sometimes ascribed kingship to, but probably weren't kings. We need to talk for a moment about Herod. So Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod, which tells us, from a historical point of view, it tells us when Jesus was born. So King Herod, known as Herod the Great, actually died 4 BC. So it tells us that Jesus was born a few years before 0 BC. King Herod was called Herod the Great, but I put that in quotations here because it kind of depends on what you're talking about. In a lot of ways, he was a great, great man, a great king. Like he did some upgrades to the temple. He did all kinds of building things in Jerusalem that people looked at and said, "That's amazing! What an awesome king." He was strategic. He was able to. First of all, he wasn't Jewish. He was actually an Edomite. So for him to be the king of the Jews is an interesting thing. But it tells you a little bit about how he was able to work within the politics of the day. Roman emperors come and go, and yet Herod is still continuing to be the king. So in a lot of ways, he was great, but he was also a horrible person. I mean, he raised taxes like crazy to pay for all these buildings that he wanted to make. But that's not even the worst of it. He was paranoid. And there was one historian who said, or maybe it was a political figure who said, it's actually safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son. And he ended up killing a number of his own children because he was afraid they were going to come for his throne. So when we talk about Herod the Great, we have to talk about what exactly do we mean by that. But Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. And so, we sing songs like "We Three Kings," but they weren't really kings. We don't know exactly who they were, but there's a lot of different theories about it, and some of them make a little more sense than others. If you read through the Old Testament, you read the book of Daniel, and Daniel was taken from Jerusalem and brought into Babylon, and he was eventually made one of the wise men of Babylon. And there's a theory that makes a lot of sense that these were like the successors of Daniel hundreds of years later. And that they were probably influenced by Daniel. That Daniel talked about this figure who was going to come and be born and be king of the Jews, and he would be more than just a king. And so these wise men are like waiting and searching and hoping for this figure who's going to come. And when Jesus was born, about that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." Which asks all kinds of questions. What exactly is the star, and how did it communicate to them that this meant that a King of the Jews was to be born? And probably, for me, the bigger question is, why would a God who tells us that things like divination is not something we should be dabbling in, why would he choose the stars to speak to these wise men to let them know that his son had been born? And these are questions like we can't really answer. We don't really know the answer. We just trust God and his sovereignty chose to do this thing, but he communicated to these men in a way that they would understand that his son would be born so that they could come and worship him. Verse 3 tells us that King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, which makes sense. I mean, like, let's say you're the chief of police, right? And someone comes and says, "Hey, I'm looking for the new chief of police." And you say, "No, I'm the chief of police." No, not you, the new guy. Would you not be a little concerned? Would you be talking to your supervisor and saying, "Do I need to be worried about my job here? Like, what's going on?" Well, King Herod doesn't have a supervisor except for like the emperor in Rome. And so when they come and they say, "We have come to worship the newborn King of the Jews," which actually, I'll back up for a second. That's an interesting statement as well. The newborn King of the Jews. Generally speaking, kings aren't born. Princes are born, and they become kings. But Jesus was a king from birth. And I want to make sure we recognize that he's different. Okay, it's not just like a regular, any other king. There's something special and different about him. But King Herod hears about this, and he's deeply disturbed for good reason, as was everyone else in Jerusalem, for good reason. Because King Herod the Great was paranoid and powerful, and when King Herod isn't happy, nobody's happy. And so Herod hears about this. He's deeply disturbed. He called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law. These are the people who would know the Old Testament scriptures inside and out. I mean, they had everything at their hands. They had it memorized. They spent all their time talking about, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And so Herod calls them in. And he says, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" And so right away he understands that this is not just talking about another king, anything like that. This is something special. This is something different. This is the Messiah. And he calls them in. "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" And it's amazing that they know. They have an answer. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they said, "for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah," you need to separate because there were two Bethlehems in those days. All right, there was one in the south and there was one in the north. They're talking about the one that was in Judah. "You, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah." Which is a funny way to say that. Because who else was born in Bethlehem? David. David is like the archetype king for Israel. He was like the greatest king they ever had up until Jesus. And so for them to say, you're not the least of, it's a bit of a weird statement. It'd be like saying, New York City, you're not the least of the cities in the United States. Oh, that's obvious, right? But they say, the prophet says, "You are not the least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be a shepherd for my people Israel." And so they know. They know where the Messiah is going to be born, in Bethlehem. And I wonder why they didn't have a permanent outpost there just waiting. Like, we're waiting for this Messiah to come. We're going to watch for him. And we're going to watch for special signs. We're going to have our ear to the ground. They know the Bible inside and out. They know what they're looking for. Why weren't they looking? And it talks about a complacency. This idea that the Messiah is going to come. And after 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 200 years, 400 years, you start to get kind of like, yeah, he's going to come at some point, but I'm not sitting around waiting. Which I wonder if there's a message in that for us. Waiting for the second coming. We're talking about Advent right now and talking about the first coming, but Jesus said he's going to come again. And I wonder how easy it is for us to grow complacent in that. I will come again soon. soon as now 2,000 years later. And I wonder how many of us kind of think, well, it's going to happen at some point, someday. But Jesus tells us we need to be ready. We need to be ready for the moment he comes. And it could come at any moment. That. Okay, just checking. But it could happen at any moment. And so we can't grow complacent the way these people did. But they know where he's supposed to be born, in Bethlehem in Judea. And so they tell Herod. Herod then called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them the time when the star first appeared. Which tells us that it wasn't like right then and there. So everyone who has a nativity set at home, you might want to go home and take the wise men and move them, at least to another table somewhere, because the idea that they came the night that Jesus was born is probably not accurate. I get it. It makes sense to put him in with the story because it's in the story here. But it's most likely probably 18 months later. And so he finds out, when did the star first appear? Then he told them, go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I can go and worship him too. Now, those of us who know the story of King Herod know that he has no interest at all in worshiping this child. He does not want to go. But I'm still amazed at the complacency. Like, one has been born who's going to take your job, and you can't even bother to get off your butt and go and find him. Like, in an ideal world, he goes to worship him. In his own twisted world, he should at least go and take care of him. Take him out. But he can't even bother. Just go find him. You do the work. When you find him, come and let me know so I can go and worship him too. After this interview, the wise men went on their way. Note that the wise men did not agree to this. He just told them to do it. The wise men went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east guided them to Bethlehem. It went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were filled with joy. And so we don't know exactly what the star was. There's lots of different theories about this. It was like a supernova. It was a comet. It was. I think there was probably something that happened in the heavens that told them at first that the child was going to be born. It got them going on their way, and I think they lost sight of it. Because then they go to Jerusalem and they say, where should we go? They have to stop and ask for directions. If they had seen the star continuously, I don't think they would have had to stop. They would have just gone right to the place. But now they see it again and they are filled with joy. Like, now we get to continue doing what we came to do in the first place. And it stopped over the place where the child was. Another reason to think that this didn't happen the night that he was born is the language used here. The child is not the same as like the infant. And it usually refers to like a little toddler, but not a baby. Another reason, they don't enter the stable, they enter the house. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Like, this is an amazing act of worship. They don't know anything about who this kid is or where his parents came from or anything like that. They just know that God has called them to come, bow down, and worship the Messiah. Then they opened their treasure chest, and they gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And whether they realized it or not, they probably didn't. These are actually prophetic. Like, gold is a gift for a king. Frankincense is used by a priest. And so this is going to signify that Jesus is actually a king and a priest. Hebrews talks about that. He'll be a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, which is an Old Testament story talking about someone who was a king and a priest. But they also give him myrrh. And myrrh was used for burial. And so, in some ways, this is almost an offensive gift to a young mother and her child, right? He's a king, he's going to be a priest, also he's going to die. But whether they realize it or not, that is the absolute truth about Jesus, that he came to earth to live a perfect life and die for our sins. And whether they realize it or not, that's the reason to worship him. And when it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream not to return to Herod. There's more to the story, and it's not good. Herod comes and he finds out how old the baby would have been, and he kills all the children. They escape to Egypt. Read your Bible. It's interesting stuff, but I don't really want to focus on that this morning. What I want to talk about is the wise men. It would have been so easy for them to drift from their mission. It would have been so easy for them to be distracted. I'm sure there were lots of sights to see along the way. I'm sure they could have gotten towards Jerusalem and been like, hey, I've heard about these things called the pyramids. Let's just keep going and check that out. Right? There's so many things that could have popped up that would have taken their attention, but they were singularly focused on this desire to come and worship the king. It would have been easy for them to worship the wrong king. It would have been so convenient for them to worship Herod. They came to Israel to worship a king. They get to Jerusalem, and there's a king. Not the newborn king, but it's a king. I mean, how easy would it be for them to travel all this distance and then finally say, we have a king, here's our gifts, we're going home. Easiest of all, they could have chosen to keep their gifts. They could have chosen to stay home. They could have been self-serving. I mean, these are valuable things, and for them to just give it away it's a hard thing to do. But wise people save their worship for the one true king. When I was in Bible college, I had to do an assignment where I had to... When you're in college and school, you have this weird thing where everything is due at the same time. Like if you're taking 4 courses, all the profs decide, maybe this week will be the time to destroy my students' lives. And one of my profs, who was trying to, the class was about trying to help us, learn how to live our lives. He realized this, and he said, you're going to benefit if you make a to-do list. And so the idea is you take all the things on your to-do list and you plan them out so that you can say, ta-da, I'm done. And I wish I could say I do that all the time. I do that when I'm at my best. When there's times when I know I have a lot coming up, I make a list and then I schedule things. I'm committing this week to do that with my home to-do list, right? Because it's too easy to watch Netflix. It's too easy to play Xbox. It's too easy to go and do something else. But when there's things that need to be done, you put it on a list. You prioritize it. You schedule it. Otherwise, you gravitate to what's easiest, convenient, loudest, and self-serving. And so we're talking about worship. And if drift happens naturally, worship has to happen intentionally. Worship doesn't happen by accident. So we need to prioritize God with a plan. Prioritize God with a plan. This has to do with giving, personal reading and prayer, small group, coming to church. I mean, for me and my family, coming to church is pretty basic. I kind of have to be here. But I know for you guys, it's a choice you make. But it's a decision you have to make in advance. If you decide to wait until Sunday morning to decide, are we going to go to church today or not? A day like today, I can almost guarantee you want to stay home. But you prioritize it. When it comes to giving, I mean, we just did a whole series on this, but, there's a lot of, it makes a lot of sense to give to God off the top. Not only do I think it's the right thing to do, it's just, if you wait until the end, there's nothing left. So you need to prioritize giving to God. Prioritize spending time with God. Because again, if you wait until the end of the day, you're exhausted, you're tired, that might work for some of you. And I'm not going to say that you can't, do your quiet time at night. I'm just saying, for myself, I usually need to do it first thing in the morning. Joining a small group, that doesn't happen by accident, but I think it's good for you. So prioritize God with a plan. Second thing is identify the things that pull you away from God. And sometimes this is maybe the hardest thing. What are the easy things? What are the convenient things, the loud things, the selfish things? What are those things that keep you from spending time with God? Identify them and eliminate them, or at the very least put them in their place. Some of these things you can't eliminate. It wouldn't be right to do that, but you need to put them in their place. Make sure that they don't take the place of God in your life. I have no idea how long the wise men traveled. I mean, we could guess, but we don't know for sure. We have no idea how difficult it was, but I know it couldn't have been easy. In that day and age, to be traveling the distance they did Worshiping Jesus isn't easy, and it doesn't happen naturally. You don't drift into it. You have to prioritize it. But the wise men knew that it was worth it. No matter what it took, no matter what it meant saying no to, they made it their mission to worship Jesus. And in a world where there are so many things screaming for your attention, your time, your energy, we need to remember that wise people save their worship for the one true King.